Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned to find out more. This group here in Georgia, and she is an OBGYN, and we like to look at her as our spiritual OBGYN. So we like to welcome you to the podcast, Dr. Stewart. How are you today?
I am fine. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. It's nice to have another entender on our podcast. So we wanted to have you on, Dr. Stewart, because we had a podcast a couple of months ago, and we had a nurse's aide, and she was great, and we wanted to always have a balance of people that we have on. And so we wanted to have you on because you're an OBGYN, but you've had more of the traditional teachings and the traditional background and the traditional expertise in the OBGYN world. So we wanted to actually balance that and see how you incorporate your business in your day-to-day and approach it from a spiritual perspective.
Okay.
So before we get started, we did want to know, everyone kind of talks about their background and how they actually got into the business that they're doing today. And I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but when you were born, you may have thought that you wanted to be an OBGYN. Was that the case?
Not quite when I was born, but somewhere between that and finishing high school.
So how did that happen?
All right, so I first was introduced with it with just really going back and forth with my sister. I used to want to become anything that my sister wanted to become. So one day she said she wanted to be a teacher. And then I said I wanted to be a teacher. And then she said she wanted to be whatever it was that she wanted to be, I would always become it. And she became totally disenchantized with me and was like, you can't just become something because I wanted to become something. So then she changed and she said she's going to be a nurse. And then I said, okay, well then I am going to become a doctor and give you orders. And she was pretty upset about that. There's no way she was going to be a nurse and I was going to be the doctor. But essentially, I started off just saying that I might want to be a doctor, and then people always respond positively to someone who wants to be a doctor because it's a very noble, prestigious somewhat profession. It requires rigorous training. And I think that society in general kind of responds positively when you say you want to. And so you get a lot of support from the people around you. And when I was in high school, I was good at science and good at math. And those were subjects that a lot of the other students struggled with. And so it began to become, I'm going to have a science-oriented career. So when I went to college, I majored in biology, really liked, science and working that part of it. And also I wanted to work with people. And the most important thing for me is that I want that whatever I choose to do be something that's going to make a positive contribution to mankind. And so OBGYN specifically, so that's how I decided to become a doctor. And OBGYN specifically, I became a nurse's aide in an operating room. As part of my college training, they would allow you to go to different places and work in that field to see if you like that field. So during that time period, I came across gynecologic surgery, and I really liked the GYN surgeries. And so I wanted to do that, but I also liked the idea of delivering babies. It just seemed like such a happy thing to do. And so I was very pleased when I went to medical school when I found out that the doctors who do the deliveries of babies are also the doctors that do the gynecological surgery. And so it became a very natural fit for me because it encompassed everything that I wanted to accomplish in life in general, and also it allowed me to take advantage of what I was skilled at and useful at.
It's really interesting if we look back historically of how a lot of people get to where they are as far as a life path depending on a sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
So if she wanted to be
my sister was very instrumental. We had a little family reunion recently, and we discussed one of the things that happened that was pivotal in my college career. My sister told me that organic chemistry was going to be such a difficult subject, and that I really had to be prepared for it, and that this is how these schools separate the ones that are going to succeed versus the ones that are just wanting to by this one course. And so I went ahead and prepared for organic chemistry. My sister got me a book. She doesn't even remember this. It was really funny. She got me a big textbook of organic chemistry. That summer, I spent it in St. Thomas with my aunt, and I read that book. And it was a huge book with maybe 2,000 pages in it. And I got about halfway done. And I answered all the questions in the back of the book. And I had the answer key, too, to the questions. And so I would do the questions, and I would correct myself, and then I would go back. I spent the entire summer doing that. And this was the same book that we were using at the college that I was going to at the time, Antioch. And then when I changed colleges, it just so happened that they used the same exact book at the new college. And I had read that book almost cover to cover. I knew everything in there. I could answer all of those questions. And it was just fortuitous, very, very, very good that I had so prepared for that. It just gave so much confidence when approaching the course that was supposed to be the maker or breaker.
Wow.
That was my sister. That was my sister who gave me that book.
So this is obviously your older sister, right?
Yes.
Do you have just one older sister, or do you have more than one?
I have an older sister and a younger sister. I'm a middle child.
Oh, okay. Because I was just wondering if you had more than one older sister, was it, why just particular sister, or were you like that with all your older sisters? But okay, so you just had the one. How much older is she?
Yeah. She's 5 years older, but we shared a room.
Okay.
My mom had 5 kids, so the 2 boys stayed in one room, the 2 girls stayed in one room, and my smaller sister is 9 years younger than me, so she was the baby and stayed pretty much with my mom.
Yeah. Okay. That's funny.
I think that same paradigm in the family would apply, that you usually hear the younger kid tagging along and the older ones, get away from me. What's your relationship with your baby sister?
Oh, I was 9 years old when my sister was born, and I can remember just praying so hard that this would be a girl child. And then when, that was in the days when we used to know ahead of time. So when my sister was born, I was just the happiest person. I made all kinds of promises, and I've always kind of looked after my little sister. I just kind of made that commitment to her and to myself and when she was young, and I kind of kept that up, as we've grown up.
Mm-hmm. There was a post on Instagram earlier this week where you had a family of 5, and all the 5 children, their parents had gone to these historically black colleges in the country. I think the mother had gone to Spelman, the father had gone to Dillard or something like that, and all their kids followed suit. And so when you became a doctor, did anyone else in your family want to follow your footsteps?
Well, I have 3 children, and one of them is saying that he wants to become a doctor, so we are looking to see if he's able to achieve that. And my other 2, which are girls, they chose not to. And as my husband is also a physician, I'm a physician, so my kids got asked quite naturally, are they going to become doctors? And my oldest girl said, the only one field that I know that I never want to be in is medicine. Because she said, I don't mind working hard and I don't mind working late, but nobody has dibs on my time in between midnight and 6 o'clock. She said, I am going to get my sleep, and that is it. I would not want to do an internship or any of those things.
Yeah. So she grew up seeing it up close and personal and was like, well, that's not going to be for me.
That's right. And she also wants to make a lot of money. And one of the misconceptions that's out there is that doctors make a whole lot of money. And while we make comfortable living, we're not going to be rich becoming doctors. And my daughter, she wants to be rich. So she's definitely not going into medicine.
She wants to be rich and well-rested.
Rich and well-rested, yep.
All right. More power. That's funny.
Let's stay there with the myth, because, once upon a time, physicians did really well, and that has changed in the last couple of years. And obviously, can you dispel the myth as to what has changed in your industry where you said that is not the case anymore?
Well, several years ago, they started with having doctors negotiate with insurance companies. I think the insurance industry is what changed it. Before, you would get insurance, and the insurance would just pay the bill. Now the insurance company negotiates with the doctors so that they pay the doctors reduced amounts of money. And so they pretty much control how much you can make, because you have already, no matter how many you do, you would really have to do a large volume in order to get the kind of living that people used to get before. Mm-hmm. Or have a practice that doesn't take insurance.
You are seeing more and more of that.
We became regulated by the insurance companies.
Wow.
So we're looking back at dentists right now who don't. I don't know if you've ever noticed that dental insurance never covers hardly anything. But dentists are not as regulated, and they make, more money than physicians do.
Wow.
So you've seen that the change in the industry where some physicians or doctors, they've left the industry in its entirety, or they've become more specialized. So are you seeing more of a specialization in your industry?
You do see some specialization, and you see a lot of job dissatisfaction, and you hear a lot of job dissatisfaction from, all the doctors around you. And it's because you just don't feel like you have that much autonomy, and you feel pigeonholed into a space. So I think that's how a lot of doctors are feeling. A lot of them are changing what they do, or just choosing to do something else, or retiring early. That's just the nature of where we're at right now. But, I also see the other end of the spectrum, because I teach medical students as well. And so I see the young ones coming in, and they're all ready to be molded and become doctors and excited about it. And I like doing that aspect of it as well, because it helps to keep you centered and remember why you wanted to do this and why it still makes sense to do it.
Exactly. And that's why I was really happy and anticipating our talk today because of, one, synchronicity. There was a lot of synchronicity in our last podcast, so I guess that's the theme this week. And it was a great story about that book your sister doesn't even remember giving you about organic chemistry, right? And so I love how those things connect, either if you're aware of it at the moment or if you see it as hindsight 2020. And one thing that I wanted to highlight, especially for people listening, is that traditionally women, or, you know, I've said this before, so I won't get brutalized, so women just mature faster than boys do, right? I mean, that's a well-known fact. But once the girls mature and they get into, you know, late middle school, high school, they don't seem like they have that initial interest in the sciences. And you kind of went through that whole stereotype of and continued on. What were your motivators, just if you could remember back in your formative years?
I just did well in school, and I loved reading. One of the things that when we went to medical school, they asked, we were trying to find out what made these people come together. How come you guys made the cut? Because it is competitive to get into medical school. And the thing that seemed to be a common bond, they gave us all a questionnaire, and then they came back to us and told us what the results were, is that most of the people who became doctors had a love of reading. And I thought that was just an interesting fact. My people who remember me growing up would probably remember that I used to always have my head in the book. And I had this one cousin, when I came over, we'd have so much fun over to her house. But when I came over, she looked around her rooms and started hiding the books because she said, once I started getting into one of those books, that would be it. And we wouldn't have as much playtime. So she would just start hiding the books because I was coming over. And then I, sure enough, would look on her shelf and see books. And then she said one day she thought she had gotten me good and just got them all hidden all away. And she left only the books that she knew I had read from the last time. And she said, then I picked up those books and reread them. She was like, oh, my goodness. She said, I can't win with you. You're going to find a way to get to these books. But I think that just the success in science is what, if you take the class and you understand the different things and it doesn't seem difficult to you, but everybody else it's seeming difficult to, then that's a motivation to continue. Mm-hmm. I do recall that when I went back to college that time with organic chemistry, I ran into a few different students, and a lot of people were not even passing that class. And so I had this one, the teacher would call us up to the board and ask different ones to solve different problems and explain it, to the class. And everybody had to do it. But after a while, a lot of people couldn't do it. And so then he had like his few people who he knew he could call on that would probably get the answer correct. And I had a couple of students that were in the class that asked me to tutor them for free. And so I did tutor them. And this one girl, she got she waited to the last minute to study, which is, not good for organic chemistry. And so I was like, well, you should have been doing all of these and all these problems and so forth. And she just was like, okay, you had to cram it into a weekend teaching her. And when she took the test, she got a C+. And I just thought I had wasted my time. It was just, I didn't make any difference. I was so disappointed. She was so happy with that C+. It was like, she was like, I'm on this end, on the right edge of the bell curve, and instead of on the other end of the bell curve, and this is the first test that I've had that I've passed. And I didn't hardly study until the weekend, like you pointed out. So I guess things are all relative. It helps me, too. When I teach other people, it brings that thing out even further for me. If I can explain it to you, then that means that I really understand it.
Exactly. So in medical school, when you were going through your matriculation, what difference do you see when you were going through it versus with the medical students that you teach today?
Well, they have a much easier time than we did. They have all these laws in place now that prevent, especially residents and interns, from overworking. We would work a 36-hour shift, and you would just be up potentially that whole 36 hours. And several years ago, they changed that and made it so that they couldn't do medical education like that anymore. So the people who are coming up now, they just have an easier time than, when I was coming through this medical system. And it's also a little easier, I think, to get into medical school than it used to be.
Why is that?
Yeah, why is that?
Well, there are lots of students that are coming from, like, the Caribbean. There's all these schools that have where they do the first 2 years of their medical school education in the Caribbean, and then they come over here and they do the last 2 years. And there's a lot of them. And these schools take a lot of medical students, and they're pulling students into this system. And so if you don't get into medical school nowadays, you just apply, to a different school that might be easier to get in. And so and before that path didn't used to exist. So I just think it is just a little easier. And then also a lot of really good talent, a lot of talented people are not going into medicine like before. I mean, it used to be that if you were really, really smart, you would really want to become a doctor. And now people who are really bright are choosing other fields because of various reasons of being dissatisfied with medicine. So people have, I think, a lot more choice, a little bit of the mystique that surrounds becoming a physician is reduced. And then there's a lot of alternative ways of becoming a doctor nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So, Lynette, for just real quick, for those that don't know, and I would be one of those people, what exactly is an obstetrician and what exactly is a gynecologist?
Well, the obstetrician is the one that does the pregnant women. So you take care of a pregnant woman from the time that they conceive until they deliver. And the gynecologist takes care of women. So, for example, you'll come annually to your gynecologist for a visit, a pap smear, breast exam, and, we send you for different tests like mammograms. That's just on an annual basis. If you have any problem that relates to being female, you would also see the gynecologist for that. And pregnancy is just carved out, and that's part of the specialty, but definitely different. So usually once the person delivers, they'll, continue coming, and just for their pap smears and just routine visits. And if they develop any gynecological problem, then they would become a GYN surgery patient.
Mm. So I see, like, for example, in your title, it has MD and then FACOG. What does that stand for?
Well, the MD, of course, is medical doctor.
Yeah.
And then FACOG is Fellow of the American College of OBGYN. So once you become board certified, you take, after you finish medical school and residency, you take further tests and you can become board certified in your specialty. And then after you become board certified, you can become a member of the American College of OBGYN, and then you get those initials that you can put on you, saying that you've finished all of that.
I would also think that as a OBGYN that it is, in addition to the expertise, that a lot of it is relationship driven. I can't imagine a woman going to 5 different doctors for something that you could handle all along. So how do you differentiate your services versus your competitors?
Versus my competitors?
Right, like if someone's thinking, okay, I want to go to 2 OBGYNs, I'm going to obviously go to Dr. Stewart for these reasons.
Well, I try to do 2 things. The first is that I really enjoy people. I like meeting them. I like discussing things with them. I like helping them with small problems that they may have. And I really value the relationships that I have with my patients over time. Many of them are people who, I may have even delivered them in some cases, and then they continue coming. And so as people age, especially as women age, we go through different seasons in our life. And my patients have now become menopausal, many of them. And so then now I'm interested in menopause because this is who I'm seeing, in the office. In addition to doing the OB, the GYN patients have aged along with me. Mm-hmm. And so I have really tried to handle a couple of things well. The first is that I looked at my practice maybe 10 years ago, and then I thought, am I doing what I want to do? Am I where I imagined I should be when I decided to become a doctor? And I felt like I wasn't. So then I decided that it was up to me to change where I'm at and not just accept what's available to me. So I started with doing 2 different things. The first, offering better services and becoming very educated myself on menopause, and also on other things that help you to age well and look well. And so after I educated myself, I then changed my practice. The first thing was that I didn't like my physical surroundings. I always imagined that I would be operating out of a really, really nice office, just state-of-the-art. And where I was at, the ceiling was leaking, and, it just wasn't the nicest place. So I started with my Decatur office. I have 2 offices, one in Decatur and the other one is in Peachtree Corners. And I started with the Decatur office, and I just kind of envisioned what I wanted my offices to look like and be like, and what I wanted to be able to offer people. And I just wrote it all down, and then I built the office out in Decatur to fit the description of what I had in my head of what I wanted to achieve. So I got the hardwood floors in that office, the waterfall as you come in the door, the people that greet you as soon as you open the door, and, just everything about it. My husband and I were, at the time, we were in our respective practices, and we calculated, of course, and got estimates of how much it was going to cost to build my office out to where it could be this fabulous thing. And the estimates were so high, it was almost heartbreaking. How in the world are we going to be able to do that? So my husband and I formed a construction company. Even though we're both doctors, we figured it out. And we got different people to come and handle, you do the hardwood floors, you do this, and we served as our own, what would be that person that's like a foreman of the construction company. Yeah. So we did that and just gathered different craftsmen to come and do it, and the result was our Decatur office. And it was totally nice because the area in Decatur where it's located, they weren't used to that. They weren't used to being able to come to a doctor that's in a place that looks like that. And so the whole thing was made to where when people sat in the waiting room, I just imagined that people would think this is just a nice place to be, just an air about it that was nice. So after we completed that, and we started off with the med spa over there, then my office that was off of Jimmy Carter, I decided I would move that some years later, and then I couldn't find a location that fit me because I wanted to make it convenient for myself. And in the area that I live, which is Peachtree Corners, I wanted to not have to go far to go to the office, and I just kind of wanted that convenience. I also knew the neighborhood that I lived in pretty well, and I knew it would be a good market to put the office in. And so it took maybe about 3 more years before I was able to find the right spot. I would always find a spot that didn't have enough space or somehow not suitable. And so finally we found a spot, and then he told me it was, almost 6,000 square feet. And I was like, oh, no, how am I going to afford this? But after having waited so long to find a place and having vetoed so many places, I mean, this one was 2,000 square feet, and that wasn't enough. This one was, not in the nicest part of the of the area, and I needed it to be in the nicest part of the area. And this one was not in enough of a shopping area to where, you get that flow of people coming through. So, I vetoed so many places, and then when this one became available, it was perfect, except it was larger than what I had envisioned. And so I just kind of went with it. I thought that if God is putting this in front of you, He's surely going to help you to find a way to afford to keep it. And so we had already gotten some of the skills with respect to how to build out a place. And also part of that was the architecture and trying to figure out which architecture could best put your vision out there. And we went through that process again, which we were experienced that from the Decatur office move. And then that's how we ended up with the office that I have now in Peachtree Corners.
Mm-hmm. No, I love the story when you kind of relive it. It's just interesting to see how things line up. And one thing that you mentioned is you figured it out. So you should definitely be commended for, the growth, not only for, as you mentioned, you had some women that had come to you for OBGYN, but they're following you throughout their whole lives. I mean, that speaks volumes to the service that you provide. One thing that I did want to ask is, there are some junctures where you may graduate from getting your medical degree and just being happy working at a hospital or working for someone else. What made you make the leap to become an entrepreneur and control your own destiny?
Well, I was in a group of 5 doctors, and the group kind of broke apart. And, you do have some prejudices, I guess you could say, in this field. And so I found myself, 2 of the people wanted to go in a group together. One other person went somewhere else with another group. Another person went into his own practice. And so I was just sort of left with what to do next. And I was feeling a little disillusioned about being in a group after that experience. And they didn't break up for any bad reasons. They just decided we were working for an organization, and some people just decided not to work for them. So when that happened, then I said, well, I have a market of people this was in Lawrenceville. I have some people in the Gwinnett County area that know me, and I have some in the DeKalb County area that knows me, and so I'm just going to hang my shingle out and see what happens. I felt that I already had a ready-made patient base too, so I was confident that it would be a success because of that.
So what is this? Oh yeah, I was gonna ask some of the what's one of the hardest parts about being a OBGYN doctor?
Well, definitely the hardest part about being an OBGYN is the nights, because babies can come at whatever time in the day they choose to, and you just have to get up and go. It's helpful, to have a family that understands and helps you to facilitate that. It's helpful to also be a person that can, I don't have any difficulty falling asleep, or, that would be a hard thing to have as a problem if you're an OBGYN. You have to be able to get up suddenly and be at full capacity. and you also have to be able to go to sleep when you have the time, immediately. So definitely the hardest part is being able to do what you do at whatever time in the morning the baby chooses to come to. And another difficult thing is that a lot of your day is spent going from one emergency to another. It's like nothing happens in slow speed. Everything is happening fast. So, like the delivery of this person, and then surgery to do next, and then, it's just always you're going from one thing to another. It's not doesn't get boring, I guess you could say, which is, real positive, I think.
What about some of the most, fulfilling and rewarding aspects of the job?
The most rewarding is the relationships that you have with people, and also being able to know for sure that each and every day that you wake up that you're making a difference in people's lives, and a positive difference.
Yeah.
So, I don't have the time, or I can't feel sorry for myself, because I get so much back from the people. I mean, you're with them at a time in the obese part of it, and also in the GYN part of it, at a time when they really need somebody in there. And if that person could be excited for them, could be, like a partner with them in the most important day of their lives, which, a lot of people, if you ask them if you look back on your life, what are some of the most important time periods? And the time when you gave birth, in the case of women in particular, would have to be right up there at the top of your list. And so you're with people at a time that it is for them the most important time in their life. Now, it may be for me just another day at work, but you have to realize that you are really meeting people at their point of need, and making a joyous occasion, hopefully even more joyous, and just kind of joining them in that joy. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of feeling that you get back from people are always very thankful, very appreciative of what you do. And I think that is probably the most rewarding thing about being in this field, and about being a doctor in general.
You said it's always an emergency. It made me think of when you hear a police siren or an ambulance and you get out of the way. It seems like we would have something in place like, let this doctor through, there's a baby that needs to be delivered.
Well, if I am rushing to a delivery from my home, and that hasn't happened to me in a long, long, long time, but most of the time the police would just kind of say, "Okay, doc, slow down though," and let you go, because most of them know that when their wives were having babies, there was somebody probably doing the same thing on that day.
So, Dr. Stewart, are you familiar with Dr. Brian Weiss?
Brian White, no.
Brian Weiss. he's an author now, and he had written a book many years ago called Many Lives, Many Masters, and it's more of past life stuff and all this, which is the only reason why I bring him up is he was a traditional doctor, but then he had gotten into he was exposed to different alternative therapies, and his awareness expanded. And there was a lot of pushback from the traditional community. And as an intender, right, you're in a group where doctors usually don't frequent, right? It seems like there's two different worlds. So what brought you into like the group, like an intenders group, and how do you incorporate the different awarenesses into your daily business?
Well, I think that I was touched a lot by the book that was written, The Secret. Mm-hmm. I read that book, and I felt like I had been doing the things in that book for my life, but I just didn't call it anything. You know, I felt like I had been visualizing things and making things happen, you know, and I thought that was how I even was able to become a doctor from where I came from. And so it really rang a chord with me. And I went from there to listening to some of the people that made up that book. Mm-hmm. And I looked at their work. And, you know, this is the Internet now, so we're able to really look things up pretty well. And so the people who made contributions, they would have different things that they were doing in the realm of spiritualism. And so I started following them and practicing meditation in particular as part of my, and just kind of making more deliberate strides and channeling what I was doing and understanding what I was doing as doing that, as opposed to just doing it without understanding that this is what you're needing to do. And then that's when I read The Secret, that was about like 10, 11 years ago. And that was when I decided that I was going to change my office back then. It was after reading that. And then I just kind of really in a concrete way started using meditation and using visualization. So then I went to, I felt very, very intuitive. My sister, I have two sisters, and they are both extremely intuitive. And my one sister is so intuitive that she can communicate with people once they have passed. She is just able to do lots of things. She uses visualization a lot. I was just telling her there's something I want to do right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to get it. And then I said, well, I just think I should ask you, what should I do? And she gave me something I should have known as a suggestion, and I'm working it now, just to visualize basically the thing that you really want and put yourself in that moment and feel the feelings that you would feel if you had those things that you want. And my sister said, just envision a person coming and asking me to be a part of their group that they're forming. So I've been doing that, and that's just recent. So the jury is out on it, but I think that I almost feel like I have it already. So I think I'm pretty close because that's how I feel. Mm-hmm. So I took a Reiki class also because I wanted to be able to pass some of those modalities and healing modalities on. And I've been doing that, you know, Reiki for my surgery patients. And also I kind of do it and Reiki involves touch, and you could do it long distance as well. So I started doing those for the patients that really needed it. And then when people experience something very hard to deal with, like a miscarriage, for example, I usually will then send them love and just pray for them and send them Reiki as well. So I have also incorporated some of that with how I instruct people, because I really feel strongly that people have a very, very big say in how well they heal and how well they do. And I can't have all this negative thinking around me in my surgery. So I just really encourage people to talk about what it is. Like if someone's having surgery, for example, they're always very, very nervous. It is very natural to feel nervous right before surgery. And I let my patients know that that's normal, that they wouldn't be normal if they just jumping on this operating room table and said, come on, go for it, without feeling feelings of anxiety. And so I just try to get them to, when they get those feelings, to grab them and throw them out the door, replace them with feelings of what they're going to accomplish from having had the surgery. So let's say the person has fibroids and heavy bleeding, and I'm doing a hysterectomy. So then they're scared because it's a major surgery. And then I will just tell them, just think about what was the reason why you're here. Was it because of those fibroids? Yes. Was it because of that bleeding? Yes. Imagine you're not going to have that problem anymore. Concentrate on not having that problem. And I try to have them go to sleep like that. So I usually hold my patients' hands when they're going to sleep, and I try to plant the thought at that moment and just sort of tell them, well, you're not going to have this, you're not going to have that. And, I give them that vision, so to speak, as they're drifting off. And I think that helps them to have a smooth recovery. And even if they do have a small complication, which, that happens from time to time, but even if they do have a small one, I try to get them to see where they're going. Sort of like, okay, you have this infection, and we're going to have to do all these different things, secure the infection, but one day it's going to be smooth, and this is going to look like this, and you're not going to have that burning when you urinate or whatever it is that's going on. So, I try to move people to the place where they themselves can visualize their good outcome. And I think that helps them to have a good outcome.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if, what you just talked about, the bedside manner we always hear about doctors. And it'd be really interesting. I want to get your take on this. So when there are some people that have one child, and it could have been that they had a bad experience, and they're like, I came in scared, and it was everything I thought. All my fears were met, and I'm not going through this circumstance again. Versus someone like you, and you said that people have been with you their whole lives, pretty much their adult lives, that they may have multiple children just because they're not afraid of that circumstance again. Have you gotten any feedback from past customers about that?
Well, I really haven't gotten any feedback about that, but I do know that almost 100% of women, after they just had a baby, declare that I am never going to see them again for this again, because childbirth is such a, it's such a difficult time, and it involves so much effort to bring a child into the world. Almost all women say that. And I just smile because I know that they're not going to do that, because, like I always tell them, the reason why they're going to come back, most likely, is because they're taking home the prize. Mm-hmm. When you take home the prize, the journey becomes minimal when you're finished with it.
Have you so for as long as you've been a doctor, have you delivered a child whose mother you delivered?
Yes, I've had that experience. I'm having it more and more lately, of course, because I've been in the business for a while now. But I was at a delivery, and I had a patient, this was probably about a year ago, and the patient had mentioned to her doctors to a mother her doctor's names, and my patients are usually seeing a midwife in the office, and so she gave the midwife's name. So when the patient came, when I came in the room and I introduced myself to the family members, the mother told me, "You're Dr. Lynette Stewart? Do you know that 17 years ago you delivered my daughter that is pregnant now?" And it was funny because the daughter who we had been taking care of didn't know either. She was she just chose an OBGYN that was in the neighborhood that she lives in. And the mother never came with her for her visits, and so she had no way of knowing. And it wasn't until she was actually delivering that we figured out that was special. And I've had maybe about 10 now that I delivered them, and then they came in late. But I've also had the experience where a patient came into the office and saw I have these boards in certain places in the office that has baby pictures on it, and I have them up on a wall in some of the rooms. And this patient came in and she said, "That's me." And she had her mom. She was like a little baby, and she's like 17, 18 now. And she recognized her mother and her father and me and herself as a newborn in the picture.
So I can imagine, and even though she said, 17 years ago, you delivered my daughter for me, but you probably had, who knows how many deliveries from that point in that 17 years. So was that something that you remembered, or they just tell you something like that and you just, okay?
Sometimes after I finish the delivery, if I've already forgotten it. I mean, it's just on to the next thing.
Yeah, on to the next one.
Unless a person is coming to see me frequently, if they, cease to be my patient or they don't go to the doctor anymore, I won't remember that delivery.
Yeah.
But there's some deliveries because the mother comes often. A lot of the people who stay patients, they bring like the pictures of the little one as it's growing up, and kind of like seeing it. They talk to me about the little issues that they're having, sometimes with their spouse, sometimes with the raising of the child. And some of them bring the child to the office so that they could see, who delivered them. And the children are always so sheepish when they come in. They're like, I don't know how to take this. But the mother wants them to be proud. I think that's what the mother wants. And I think she also wants me to be proud.
Oh, absolutely. And it seems like the relationship is a lot stronger because the mother is coming along and, they're reinforcing how great the experience was working with you.
That's true.
So we're almost out of time, but I know on your site you had some December specials coming up and what have you, so I'd like for you to talk about your sites, your locations, information, and your special at this time if you want.
Okay. Well, I have branched into aesthetics, and we are doing liposuction for body contouring, and we do an excellent job of that. And we are making little tiny incisions that people can barely see and changing, the pot belly that may have developed over time and different aspects of the person's physique. And we have a special now for our liposuction where we can do one area at 50% after you do a second area at 50% after you do the first area. And we also are having a special with microneedling. Microneedling is a procedure that's done on the face to tighten the skin of the face. And it's done usually in a series where you come once a month. And then we also do a radio frequency tightening where we have this machine, and it produces a warmth. and it tightens the skin of the face or whatever area of the body we're targeting. Usually it's the face. So we are offering those at 50% off this month, the microneedling and the ThermiTight procedures. And we're also offering a special on our vaginal tightening procedure. So we have a procedure where we can tighten the vaginal area, which makes it look and feel more youthful. It does a couple of things. It can help with incontinence where you lose a little bit of urine. It helps with sexual response. And it helps you to be able to reach orgasm faster, as in more neurons are made to make that happen. So that procedure is called vaginal rejuvenation. We are running a special on those procedures as well. So with that, it's a series of 3, and we do 2 and give you the 3rd free. So those are our specials that we're doing right now.
And what's your site and number?
What's that?
What's your site and number so people can reach out to you directly?
Oh, Female Health and Med Spa is the website, and the telephone number is 770-638-8446.
And those specials, they are honored at both locations?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you're super busy with your emergencies and delivering babies and so on and so forth. But I think you also help bridge the gap of what I personally see as far as 2 different camps. Like there's the traditional medical camp, and then you have an alternative camp. And you've highlighted over the past hour how they can actually work together, and especially having someone with your traditional background and incorporating some of these alternative therapies. I think the clients benefit wholeheartedly. I mean, they benefit the most out of everything that you can offer.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm very happy to be able to offer it to people. I feel like I said, it's important to me that I make a difference in people's lives, and I feel like all of these different tools help me to be able to make that difference that I want to make.
One last question. You have any other questions, David?
Yeah, I have one final question. Can guys come get facials or just the women?
Guys can come too. We also do the hormone therapy for the men too. So women sometimes, the bioidentical hormones that we're doing. One of the funny things is that the women come in and we correct their hormones, and then they start saying, "But I'm fine, but you need to work on him." So sometimes we'll bring their husbands in because, like one woman said, "Oh, you got me all revved up. There's no sense in me being revved up and him being a dud, so bring him on in here."
What is that, like testosterone therapy or something? Or? Yeah. Okay.
That is hilarious. It seems like the special that you have going on is great for people preparing for their New Year's Eve festivities. Well, we've just been going through another great podcast. I definitely, again, thank Dr. Lynette Stewart. We call her our spiritual OBGYN. This is Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. I am Hamza.
And I am David.
And thanks again for making our podcast today, Dr. Stewart. We really appreciated it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for checking out another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast. Please check us out on our website at intrinsicmotivation.life, where you can click on the Speak Pipe button and leave any suggestions for future podcasts that you'd like us to cover. Also, check us out on our social media sites. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, iTunes podcast, in addition to Stitcher and Google Play, all under Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. Check you out next time. Have a great day.